The bus station lights made everything look colder than it already was. Nora Calloway sat on a plastic bench with her daughter pressed against her side. Wren was 10 years old and still believed things would get better. That, more than anything, terrified Nora. Because Nora had stopped believing that somewhere between Ohio and Kentucky and every shelter that locked its doors at 9, she pulled her coat tighter around the girl. Outside, snow moved sideways through the parking lot lights. A vending machine hummed in the corner. Her phone had 11% left. A security guard walked past. He looked at them. He didn't stop. He didn't have to. She already knew what she looked like, a woman who had run out of options and was sitting very still so no one would notice. Then she saw it. An envelope. Sitting upright on the bench directly across from her, like it had been placed there. Not dropped, not forgotten. Her name was printed on the front, Nora Calloway. She hadn't seen her own name written down in months. It looked strange, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had an address, someone who mattered to the postal system. She picked it up. The return address read, Calloway Estate Legal Office, Harlan County, West Virginia. Her hands went still. She hadn't heard the word estate next to her family name in her entire life. She tore it open, and everything changed. The bus station lights made everything look colder than it already was. Nora Calloway sat on a plastic bench with her daughter pressed against her side. Wren was 10 years old and still believed things would get better. That, more than anything, terrified Nora. Because Nora had stopped believing that somewhere between Ohio and Kentucky and every shelter that locked its doors at 9, she pulled her coat tighter around the girl. Outside, snow moved sideways through the parking lot lights. A vending machine hummed in the corner. Her phone had 11% left. A security guard walked past. He looked at them. He didn't stop. He didn't have to. She already knew what she looked like. A woman who had run out of options and was sitting very still so no one would notice. Then she saw it. An envelope. Sitting upright on the bench directly across from her, like it had been placed there. Not dropped, not forgotten. Her name was printed on the front, Nora Calloway. She hadn't seen her own name written down in months. It looked strange, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had an address, someone who mattered to the postal system. She picked it up. The return address read, Calloway Estate Legal Office, Harlan County, West Virginia. Her hands went still. She tore it open. The paper inside was thick, official. There was a courthouse seal at the top, and the language was formal and dense. But one sentence stood alone, like it was waiting for her. You are the sole heir to the Calloway farmhouse and surrounding property. Established 1882. Harlan County, West Virginia. Nora read it again, then again. Her grandmother, Hazel Calloway, a woman she hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. A woman who lived alone on a mountain with no cell phone and a wood stove and opinions about everything. A woman Nora had last seen through the rear window of her mother's car, standing on a porch, watching them leave without chasing. That had hurt more than anything, the not chasing. Wren stirred beside her. She pressed her chin against Nora's arm and looked up. "Mom, what is it?" Nora folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it, then read it one more time just to make sure it didn't disappear. "I think," she said. "I think we have somewhere to go." Wren looked at her for a long moment. The way kids look at you when they're deciding whether or not to believe you. Then she leaned back against Nora's side and said nothing. Outside, the snow kept falling. The vending machine kept humming. A bus pulled in from somewhere, and a bus pulled out toward somewhere else. But Nora sat very still, because somewhere in the mountains of West Virginia, there was a house with her name on it, and she had no idea what that meant. But for the first time in months, for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, she wanted to find out. They boarded the first morning bus heading north. Wren pressed her face against the window and watched the ridgelines rise out of the dark. The mountains didn't announce themselves. They just appeared. Gray and enormous and indifferent, like they had been there long before anyone thought to name them and would be there long after everyone forgot. Nora watched them too. She had grown up hearing two things about Harlan County. The first was that it was beautiful. The second was that it would trap you if you let it. Her mother had believed the second thing completely, and she had driven away from it with both hands on the wheel and never looked back. Nora had believed her, because that's what daughters do. But now, she sat on a bus heading back toward a place she had spent years pretending didn't exist. And the mountains outside the window didn't look like a trap. They looked like something else. She just didn't have the word for it yet. The bus dropped them in town just before noon. From there, it was on foot. Nora carried 2 bags and the letter folded in her coat pocket. Wren walked beside her with her hands tucked into her sleeves and her eyes moving over everything. The town was small and quiet in the way that places get quiet when something has been leaving for a long time. A few storefronts open, a few closed. A diner with a hand-painted sign. A hardware store with a display of snow shovels nobody had moved in weeks. People looked at them, not unkindly, just with that particular attention of a town that knew its own and noticed what wasn't. They didn't say anything. Neither did Nora. She kept walking. The gravel road out of town curved upward through bare trees, and Nora followed it from memory. Or something like memory. More like muscle. Her feet seemed to know the turns before her eyes did, which felt strange, because she had spent 15 years convincing herself she had forgotten this place entirely. Apparently, her feet hadn't gotten the message. Wren walked close beside her. The cold was real now. The kind that didn't just touch your skin but got underneath it, into the joints, into the thinking. "Is it far?" Wren asked. "Little more. What if it's terrible? Then we figure something else out." Wren considered this. "Okay, just okay. Simple as that. No follow-up questions, no catastrophizing. Just okay and keep walking." Nora had spent the last 8 months making and breaking promises to this child, and Wren had never once stopped trusting her, which was wonderful and gutting in equal measure. They rounded the last bend in the road, and there it was, the Callaway farmhouse. It rose out of the overgrown brush like something that had decided to stay standing out of sheer stubbornness. 2 stories. White clapboard siding peeling back in long strips. One shutter hanging at an angle from the upper left window like a crooked arm. The porch sagged heavily on the right side. The front steps had a gap in the middle where a board had given way, but the chimney was straight. The roof had held, and the window above the front door reflected the gray winter sky like an open eye. Wren stopped walking. "Is that it?" "Yeah." "It looks sad." Nora looked at the house, really looked. At the cornerstone carved with 1882. At the front door still painted the same deep red it had been when she was a child. At the old iron hook beside the door where her grandmother used to hang her gardening gloves. The gloves were gone. Everything else was still there. "It's been waiting," Nora said quietly. "A long time." Wren tilted her head. "You think it remembers you?" Nora didn't answer. She walked up the porch steps slowly. The boards groaned beneath her boots. Not in collapse, just in the particular complaint of old wood acknowledging weight it hadn't felt in a while. She pulled the brass key from the lawyer's envelope. It stuck in the lock. She worked it, once, twice. Then a hard click. The door swung open. The smell hit her first. Cold air and old wood and something underneath both of those things. Something she couldn't name right away. And then she could. Dried herbs, the faintest trace of wood smoke, the particular smell of a house that had been lived in for so long it had absorbed the person inside it. Hazel. Nora stood in the doorway and didn't move for a moment. Wren slipped past her and walked straight in. The front room was high-ceilinged and still. Faded wallpaper in a pattern of small red flowers. Floorboards dark with age. An old couch. A rocking chair beside the fireplace. A mirror on the far wall cracked diagonally from corner to corner, like something had struck it once a long time ago, and it had decided to hold together anyway. Dust covered everything. A soft gray hush over all of it, like someone had folded a memory up and left it here to wait. Wren ran her hand along the back of the rocking chair. This place is enormous. It's not that big. It feels enormous because it's ours. Nora opened her mouth, closed it, because Wren was right, and the word ours landed somewhere in Nora's chest that hadn't been touched in a very long time. They moved through the house slowly. The kitchen had an enamel sink chipped in one corner, and open shelves lined with old mason jars, and a cast-iron stove crouched against the far wall. Nora flipped a light switch out of habit. Nothing. She crossed to the pantry and found the fuse box. She flipped the main breaker, then the others one at a time. A hum. The kitchen light blinked and then held. Wren gasped. "We have light." Nora gripped the counter edge. Light had been a request for months, a ration, a favor, something that belonged to other people's spaces. Here, it was just theirs. She didn't let herself feel it too much. Not yet. There was too much still unknown. But she held the edge of the counter and let herself feel it a little. They explored the upstairs. The small front bedroom had been Nora's during summer visits. The iron bed frame was still there. A dusty quilt in a faded wedding ring pattern folded at the foot. The window looked out over the front porch and through the bare trees to the ridgeline beyond. Nora sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress complained, but held. "Can I have this room?" Wren asked from the doorway. Nora almost smiled. "If you're okay with the ghosts of all my terrible teenage decisions." Wren walked in and sat beside her. "Do ghosts take up much space?" "Surprisingly little." "Good. Then I'll take it." They spent the rest of the afternoon making the house livable, beating dust from cushions, opening windows despite the cold, finding that the plumbing still worked after 20 minutes of coaxing the basement pump. The water that came out ran brown at first, then ran clear. The single kitchen burner that still functioned got them through a can of soup and half a sleeve of crackers for dinner. It wasn't much, but they ate it warm, at the table, in their own kitchen. Wren asked between spoonfuls, "Did great-grandma live here her whole life?" "Almost. She left once for a few months when she was young. But she came back." "Why did your mom hate it so much?" Nora turned her spoon in the soup. She thought this place kept her stuck. She wanted something different, something louder. And Grandma thought old things were worth fixing. Wren considered this with the particular seriousness of a 10-year-old processing a complicated truth. "I think old things are worth fixing too." Nora looked at her daughter. "Yeah, I'm starting to think so." After dinner, Wren fell asleep early, worn out from cold and walking and the particular exhaustion of a day that had changed everything. Nora moved through the house alone, by lamplight, her fingers trailing along door frames and furniture, and the spines of old books nobody had touched in years. She wasn't looking for anything. or so she told herself. She was in the kitchen when she stopped. One frame on the wall caught her attention. It was empty. Just a square of faded wallpaper, slightly less faded than the rest. Like something had hung there so long it had protected the paper underneath from the years. But the frame itself didn't feel decorative. It felt deliberate. Nora stepped closer, pressed one corner. A soft click. The frame swung outward on a hidden hinge. Behind it was a small recess cut directly into the plaster wall. Inside sat a metal tin and a bundle of papers tied with string that had once been white and was now the color of old cream. Nora stared. Her first thought was, why hide something like this? Her second thought was, what were you afraid they'd find? She pulled the tin free. It was heavier than it looked. The papers came with it. She set both on the kitchen table and stood looking at them for a moment. The lamp threw orange light across the tin's surface. It was plain, no markings, just old metal worn smooth in the places hands had touched it. She didn't open it, not yet. She heard the stair creak. Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair loose, eyes half open. "Mom, what's that?" Nora held the tin up. "I don't know yet." Wren blinked at it. "Are you going to open it?" In the morning, Wren looked at the tin, then at her mother, then back at the tin. "Okay, but I want to be here when you do." Nora set it back on the table. "Okay." Wren disappeared back upstairs. The fire in the stove crackled low. Outside, the wind came across the mountain in a long, slow wave through the trees. Not violent, just present. The way this place had always been present. Steady and enormous and patient in a way that made human urgency feel slightly embarrassing. Nora sat down at the table. She thought about her grandmother, about a woman who had lived in this house for 60 years and kept her secrets inside the walls. Literally, inside the actual walls. She thought about her mother, who had left this place at 22 and never come back, and spent the rest of her life being loudly certain she'd made the right choice. She thought about herself. 38 years old, sitting in a bus station at 2 a.m. with 11% battery left. She thought about the look on Wren's face when the kitchen light came on. Some things are worth fixing. Yeah. The morning was gray and cold, and the tin sat on the table where she'd left it, waiting with the particular patience of something that has already waited a very long time and knows how. Wren came downstairs fully dressed and sat across from Nora without a word. She wrapped both hands around a mug of hot water because they had no coffee, and she looked at the tin. "Ready?" Nora asked. Wren nodded. Nora pried it open. Inside were photographs, black and white, scalloped edges. Faces looked up at her from another century. Men in suspenders beside horse-drawn wagons. Women in long, dark skirts, standing in front of this very house, looking directly at the camera, with the particular directness of people who didn't think photographs were for smiling. And near the bottom, a sharper image. Hazel, young, maybe 30, standing beside a man Nora didn't recognize. He wore a suit that looked too clean for the mountain. He was holding a document rolled under his arm like he owned it. Hazel was looking at the camera, not at him. On the back, in her grandmother's handwriting, the day they tried to buy us out. We said no. Nora turned it over and looked at Hazel's face again. That expression, jaw set, eyes forward, the look of someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Nora set the photograph aside. The papers beneath were heavier. Survey maps, old deeds, correspondence with letterheads from companies that no longer existed. She unfolded the largest map carefully. It was hand-drawn. Topographic lines curved in tight bands across the page. A ridge, a creek, a narrow footpath, and at the northern field, a small circle with a line through it. Next to it, in Hazel's tight script, Spring House. Original. Do not mark on county survey. Nora leaned in. Do not mark on county survey. That wasn't instruction. That was concealment. She moved to the next document. It bore the seal of a company called Dunning Mineral Partners and was dated 1952. The letter offered what it called fair compensation for subsurface access rights across the full extent of the Callaway property. The language was polite, the way a threat can be polite when the person making it has enough money to be patient. Below it, a response in Hazel's handwriting. Short. No greeting. No signature line. Not enough. Not for what you want. Not for what this place has already given. And below that, the company's response. Longer. More formal. Still polite. But the message underneath the politeness was clear. Progress would happen, with or without her cooperation. Nora sat back in her chair. Wren was looking at one of the maps. She touched the circle with one finger. That symbol. It's on the map too. Nora looked. It was. The same circle, the same downward line, marked on the northern field. And then again, further along the ridge at a location labeled simply South Hollow.
That's what she wanted us to find,
Nora said quietly.
Wren looked up. Is it treasure?
Nora looked at the documents spread across the kitchen table, at the old photographs, at the map with its careful handwriting and its deliberate markings and its instructions to hide certain things from the people paid to make official records. Not treasure, she said. Truth. Maybe, but she was already reaching for her coat. The path to the spring house was overgrown, but not gone. Just hidden, the way things get when no one tends them. But the ground beneath still remembers. Nora moved through knee-high, frost-stiffened grass with the map in one hand and Wren's fingers in the other. The cold had settled deep overnight. The trees stood bare and gray. The mountain was quiet in the way that felt less like absence and more like attention. They found it half buried in leaves and crumbled shale. The spring house, what remained of it. The stone walls had held, though the wooden roof had given way years ago and fallen inward. Water still ran nearby, a narrow trickle from somewhere under the rocks. Wren crouched beside it and put her hand in. It's warm. Nora touched the water too. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the air. Warmer than the frozen ground surrounding it. The stone wall behind the spring was rough and mossy. Nora brushed snow from it with her sleeve, looking for the symbol from the map. And then she found it. Faint, almost worn away. A circle with a line through it carved into a slab of gray shale near the base. She pressed her palm flat against it. It gave. Just slightly. Not like loose stone. Like something built to give. She pushed harder. A low groan. Dust falling. And then the slab swung inward on a hinge that should have rusted shut decades ago, but hadn't. Because someone had built it right. Someone had built it to last. Cold, stale air spilled out. Behind the stone was a passage, narrow, dark, just wide enough for a person to move through sideways. Wren looked at her. Nora looked back. She lit the flashlight from her coat pocket and aimed it into the dark. The passage was short, maybe 20 feet. It ended in a small chamber, carved directly into the rock. The walls were rough stone. The floor was packed earth. And in the center sat a wooden chest, dark with age, but intact. She stepped inside, tested the floor, then waved Wren in. The chest opened without a lock. Inside were 3 bundles. The first held letters bound in twine, dozens of them, dated across 3 decades. Some addressed to lawyers, some to government offices, some to no one at all, just written into the air like prayer or protest. The second bundle was maps, more detailed than anything she'd found in the tin. Geological assessments, water table measurements, annotations in Hazel's handwriting, tracking how the land changed across seasons and years. The third bundle was wrapped in linen cloth. Nora unwrapped it carefully. A cylindrical metal case. On its side, stamped in faded ink, Harlan Valley Geological Survey. 1901. Private record. Her hands weren't entirely steady. She cracked the wax seal, unrolled the parchment inside. The document was dense with technical language, survey measurements, depth calculations, composition analysis. But the conclusion was not dense at all. It was plain. It said that the mineral concentrations beneath the southern ridge of the Callaway property were significant. Rare. The kind of thing that changed the value of land from agricultural to something else entirely. The kind of thing that explained why a company called Dunning Mineral Partners had sent polite, threatening letters in 1952. The kind of thing that explained why Hazel had hidden this document inside a rock on the side of a mountain and told no one. Nora stared at the parchment. Wren's voice came from just over her shoulder. "Is that real?" "Yeah." She knew, Wren said. Grandma knew the whole time. Nora nodded slowly, and she chose silence over fortune. The chamber around them was still, the stone walls pressed close. Somewhere above them, the mountain continued being enormous and old, and completely unbothered by the fact that two people were crouching inside it, trying to understand what had been hidden here and why. She didn't want someone to find it, Nora said slowly. She wanted someone to deserve it. Wren was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think we deserve it?" Nora looked at her daughter, at her cold pink cheeks and her serious eyes, and the particular way she had asked the question, not fishing for reassurance, just genuinely asking. "I think we're going to try to." They packed everything into Nora's bag and moved back through the passage. The slab groaned shut behind them. Outside, the cold hit like a wall, but the light felt different coming out than going in. Sharper, more real. They made the climb back in silence. At the top of the ridge, Wren stopped and looked out across the valley. The town was visible in the distance. Small, contained, smoke rising from chimneys. "Do you think someone knows we found it?" she asked. Nora looked at the valley too. "I think someone's been waiting for me to come back and look." Wren absorbed this. "Is that bad? It means we have to be careful." Wren nodded. "Okay, just okay again. Simple as that." Back at the house, Nora spread everything across the kitchen table. The photographs and the letters and the survey maps and the parchment from the stone chamber. She laid them in order. Timeline first, then geography, then the correspondence arranged by Cinder. And there it was, the shape of it. Not one secret, a system of secrets. Each piece hidden in a different place. Each piece pointing to the next. Not buried to be lost. Buried to be found. By someone specific. By someone who would understand what to do with it. Or someone who would be forced to figure it out. Nora stood at the table for a long time. She was still standing there when Wren called from the stairs. "Mom." "Yeah, I found something else." The something else was under the floorboard in Nora's old bedroom. Right where the iron bed frame had sat for probably 50 years, protecting the seam in the floor from casual notice. 5 journals, each one wrapped in a square of quilting cloth, each one numbered in red ink on the spine. Volume 1 through 5. Hazel's handwriting on the inside cover of each. Nora sat on the edge of the bed with the first journal open across her knees. Wren sat beside her close enough that their arms touched. The entry on the first page was dated decades back. The handwriting was steady and dark. When no one listened, I wrote anyway. Because the paper always listens. Nora's throat tightened. She kept reading. Hazel's voice came off the page the way her grandmother's actual voice had sounded. No wasted words, no decoration, just the thing itself plainly stated. She wrote about the land the way other people wrote about family. Not sentimentally, practically. The way the North Slope held snow longer than the South. The way the creek ran different colors in different seasons. The way the soil near the hollow grew things that shouldn't have grown at that elevation. And then she wrote about people. About the town meetings where she was the only woman in the room and the men spoke around her like she was furniture. About the property assessments that kept coming back wrong in the county's favor. About the years of small erosions, small pressures. None of them individually enough to fight in court. All of them together, a slow and patient siege. Nora turned pages, and then she found it. I lost your mother today. She almost stopped reading. She didn't. Not to death, to a different kind of leaving. She slammed the car door and told me I loved this land more than I loved her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I do. But this land never walked away from me. It never packed its things and drove away without looking back. It was here in the morning, and it was here at night, and it never once made me feel like I had to choose between being myself and being loved. Maybe that's a terrible thing to say about a daughter. Maybe it's just honest. I hope someday she finds something that stays. I hope someday the girl she took with her finds something that stays too. Nora closed the journal. Wren didn't say anything. She just leaned her head very slightly against Nora's shoulder. The house was quiet around them. The fire in the stove crackled low. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in that long, unhurried way it had, like it had nowhere to be and had already decided. Nora sat with her mother's name unspoken between herself and her grandmother's handwriting. Sat with the particular grief of understanding someone too late, of seeing the shape of a wound clearly only after the person who made it was gone. Her grandmother had been lonely. Her mother had been hurt, and Nora had grown up in the space between those two things without ever knowing the name of the place she was in. She knew its name now. She placed her hand flat on the journal cover, felt the worn cloth, felt the edges of the pages beneath. Decades of Hazel's careful observation. Decades of record-keeping for an audience that never came, until now. She looked at Wren. She didn't say anything. Wren didn't either. But something passed between them in the quiet of that room. Something about staying and going and what it cost and what it was worth. Something Nora didn't have words for yet, but felt in her bones like the warmth of that impossible spring. She would figure out the words later. Right now, she needed to think, because whoever had been in this house before she arrived had been looking for something. And now, she knew what it was, and that changed things significantly. Because knowing and being the only one who knows are two very different conditions. She needed to talk to someone who had been here, who had watched what Hazel watched and remembered what Hazel tried to protect. There was a name, Silas Merritt. The lawyer's letter had mentioned him as a contact for property matters, but Harriet Mobley, the woman at the diner in town, had said something when Nora stopped for coffee that morning. Something offhand. If you're Hazel's girl, you'll want to talk to Silas before anyone else does. Before anyone else does. Nora folded the survey map carefully and tucked it back into her coat pocket alongside the letter. She looked at the journals. 5 of them. Decades of truth sitting under a floorboard waiting. She looked at the table covered in documents. A whole system of hidden knowledge laid bare for the first time. And she looked at the window above the kitchen sink, at the gray winter sky beyond it, at the ridgeline visible in the distance, holding its ground against the weather, the way it had been holding its ground against everything for longer than anyone in this story had been alive. Tomorrow she'd go into town. She'd find Silas Merritt before anyone else did, because she had the shape of the thing now, the outline of it, and she needed someone who had been close enough to Hazel to fill in the center. Someone who had watched this fight from the beginning. Someone who might know what Hazel had been afraid of, and what she had been waiting for. The diner sat at the edge of town like it had always been there and always would be. Red vinyl booths, windows streaked with last week's rain, a neon sign buzzing in the daylight because no one had gotten around to fixing the timer in probably 15 years. Nora pushed through the door and the bell above it chimed and every head turned. That kind of town. She kept her shoulders square and walked to the counter. A woman in her 60s with cherry red hair and a name tag that read, Harriet, set down a coffee pot and looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had been expecting this visit and had opinions about the timing. You're Hazel's granddaughter. Nora settled onto a stool. That's right. Harriet poured coffee without being asked. You've got her eyes. And her way of walking into a room like she already owns the argument. Nora wrapped her hands around the mug. I need to find Silas Merritt. Harriet's expression shifted. Just slightly. The way a face shifts when a name means something complicated. He comes in most mornings, she said. But this morning he came in and left real fast, which he doesn't usually do, which probably means he already knows you're here. Nora looked at her. How would he know, honey? Harriet set the pot down. This is Harlan County. You breathed different when you got off that bus yesterday, and 3 people called me about it. Fair enough. She was halfway through the coffee when the door opened and Silas Merritt walked in, tall, 70s, a face like old leather. the kind of man who had spent decades outside in weather that didn't apologize. He wore a heavy canvas coat and moved with the deliberate economy of someone whose joints had opinions, but who had decided not to let that run the schedule. He saw Nora. He didn't look surprised. He walked to the booth in the far corner and sat down without looking back, like he already knew she would follow. She did. He had a map with him, old, folded into quarters. He set it on the table between them and pressed it flat with one hand. "Your great-great-grandfather drew that," he said. "Every inch of this valley. Nothing but a compass and a level head, and about 40 years of patience." Nora looked at the map. The lines were fine and careful. The handwriting in the margins was different from Hazel's. Older, more formal, like someone had been taught penmanship by someone who believed it mattered. She found the symbol near the South Hollow marking, the circle with the line. Same as on the stone slab, same as on Hazel's map. He knew where the veins were. Silas said, before anyone else did, before the county did, before the companies did. He kept it off the official surveys on purpose. Why? Because he understood what would happen if the wrong people found out. He looked at her steadily, and he was right. Because when a company called Dunning Mineral Partners figured it out on their own in 1952, they came for it. "Harold Dunning," Nora said. Silas's jaw tightened. "You found the letters. I found the letters." He nodded once. Harold Dunning was the kind of man who believed that anything could be purchased if the price was set correctly. He made your grandmother 6 offers in 4 years, each one bigger than the last. He had lawyers. He had county connections. He had a letter from someone in the state assessor's office that called the property a candidate for eminent domain on public interest grounds. Nora felt her stomach move. They tried to take it legally. They tried everything legally first, Silas said. When that didn't work, they tried other things. What other things? He was quiet for a moment. Property line disputes that appeared out of nowhere. Tax assessments that came back wrong 3 years in a row. A rumor that the farmhouse foundation was compromised. An inspector who showed up unannounced with paperwork that turned out to have a forged signature. Nora stared at him. Hazel fought every single one. He continued. She was meaner than a wet cat when she needed to be. She hired her own surveyor. She filed her own counter-assessments. She kept copies of everything, duplicates in 3 different locations, because she understood that people with money and patience will wait you out if they can. And the only defense against that is to be more stubborn than they are patient. And she was. He almost smiled. She was the most stubborn human being I have ever personally encountered. And I have encountered a lot of stubborn human beings. Nora looked at the map again. Harold Dunning is dead. Yes, but his daughter is on the county council. Silas looked at her for a long moment. You found that too. The letter from 1952. Hazel wrote her name in the margin. Marette Dunning. He exhaled slowly. Marie grew up hearing her father talk about this land the way some men talk about a debt they're owed. Like it was always supposed to be theirs and the only question was how to collect. He paused. I don't know what she believes herself. I genuinely don't. But I know she signed the paperwork that put the Northern Ridge rezoning on the council agenda. Nora felt the thing she'd been carrying since she opened the tin get heavier. When is the vote? End of the month. How long have they been planning it? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Set it on the table beside the map. It was a photocopy of a meeting notice. The date at the top was 3 weeks before Hazel died. Nora looked at it, then looked at Silas. They scheduled the vote while she was still alive. He nodded. They knew she was dying. He nodded again, smaller this time. Like the acknowledgement itself cost something. Nora sat with that for a moment, with the particular coldness of it, not anger yet, just the clear, cold fact of it settling in. They didn't wait for her to be gone out of respect. They scheduled the timeline around her dying, like it was a logistical factor, like she was a logistical factor. Silas said nothing. He didn't need to. Nora folded the meeting notice and put it in her pocket alongside everything else she was carrying. There was one more thing. She looked at him directly. Someone was in the house before I arrived. Coffee on the table. Drawer left open. Muddy boot prints on the kitchen floor. Silas didn't look away. He also didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Nora waited. That was me, he said finally. The words landed flat and simple. Nora kept her face still. Why? He reached into his coat again. This time, he pulled out an envelope. Legal size. Sealed. With Hazel's handwriting on the front. For the Land Conservation Office, Harlan County. He set it on the table. She wrote it 2 months before she died. He said, had it witnessed, had it notarized, everything done right. She just never sent it. And when she passed, I went to the house because I was afraid of who might get there first. I took it because I didn't know who was coming. I didn't know if whoever inherited the property would understand what it was or what to do with it. Nora looked at the envelope, and if it had been someone else, someone who wanted to sell, then I would have kept it safe until the right time. He said quietly, which is what Hazel asked me to do if it came to that. Nora picked up the envelope, turned it over. The seal was intact. Why are you giving it to me now? Because you went to the spring house, he said. Because you found the chamber. Because you're sitting here asking the right questions instead of the wrong ones. He paused. And because you sound like her. Not your voice, just The way you hold your ground when you're scared. Nora looked at the envelope in her hands. Am I scared? You'd be foolish not to be. She tucked the envelope into her coat. She stood. He stood. Be careful who you trust in this town, he said. Not because everyone is against you, but because some people are against you without knowing it. They've been told a story about this land for so long, they've stopped questioning whether it's true. Nora looked at him. What's the story they've been told? That it's empty, he said. That it's just sitting there. That it could be something useful instead of something forgotten. She picked up the old map from the table. Can I keep this? That's why I brought it. She walked out of the diner, and the bell above the door chimed again. Outside, the cold was harder than it had been that morning. The sky had gone the color of old pewter. Down the street, a truck idled at a red light. A woman walked a dog past the hardware store. The town moved at its ordinary pace like nothing had shifted. But something had. She could feel it. Back at the house, Wren was at the kitchen table with the survey map spread in front of her and a pencil behind her ear, like she had been there long enough to develop habits. She had arranged the documents in a grid. Oldest to newest, left to right. She looked up when Nora came in. I organized them. I can see that. The ones from the valley floor are different from the ones from the ridge. The soil composition, the water measurements. They're describing two different things, basically. Nora hung her coat and sat across from her. How do you know what soil composition measurements look like? Wren shrugged. I read the labels. Nora looked at the grid of documents, at her 10-year-old daughter who had been sitting here quietly turning old papers into a system. She thought Hazel would have liked you very much, she said. Good work. Wren beamed, then went serious again immediately because she had inherited something of Nora's suspicion of sentiment. What did Silas say? Nora told her. All of it. The 1952 history. The vote scheduled before Hazel died. The envelope. The fact that Silas had been in the house. Wren listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, which meant she understood the weight of it. When Nora finished, Wren said, So they planned it while she was dying. Yeah, that's really mean. Yeah, what do we do? Nora spread the old map Silas had given her across the top of Wren's grid, pressed it flat. First we go see Della Vance. She knew Hazel longer than anyone, and she'll tell me things Silas won't. How do you know? Because Silas is a careful man, and Della, based on what Harriet told me this morning, is not. Wren almost smiled. Okay, when? Now. Wren was already standing. Della Vance lived at the edge of town, where the pavement ended and the gravel began. The driveway was cracked and swallowed by weeds. The mailbox leaned. A wind chime made from old silverware and bolts hung from the porch eave and made a sound like someone thinking very hard. Nora knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. The door opened on a woman who looked like time had tried its best and mostly failed. Small, sharp-eyed, gray hair in a braid that had given up on being neat sometime around noon. She wore a sweater 2 sizes too large with a coffee stain near the hem, and she looked at Nora like she had been expecting this visit and had feelings about the timing. "Took you long enough," she said. "I got here as fast as I could. Hazel said you would say something like that. Come in." The inside smelled like lemon polish and wood smoke and something herbal Nora couldn't identify. Every flat surface had a doily on it. Framed cross-stitch covered the walls. A clock in the kitchen ticked with the particular authority of a clock that had been ticking in the same spot for decades and considered itself essential. Della made tea without asking. Set a mug in front of Nora and a smaller one in front of Wren, and said, "Careful, it bites," if you rush it, and sat down in a chair by the fire that had clearly been her chair for about 40 years. She looked at Nora. "She knew you'd come back," she said. "Not hoped, knew. How? Because she knew you, even when you didn't know her anymore. She kept track of you, not in a strange way, just she knew where you were, what you were doing, whether you were all right." Nora felt something shift in her chest, quietly, like a door opening in a room she had kept locked without entirely meaning to. She never reached out. Della looked at her steadily. She was afraid you'd say no, and she couldn't have stood that. Not at the end. Nora looked at the fire. "That's..." She stopped. Della waited. "That's very sad." "Yes," Della said simply. "It is." They sat with that for a moment. The clock ticked. The fire moved. Then Nora said, "The vote." Della nodded. "I know about the vote. Murray Dunning." Della's expression was complicated. "Murray is not her father. I want to be fair to that. Harold Dunning was a man who believed he was owed things that weren't his. Murray is..." She paused. "A woman who grew up in the shadow of a man like that, which does something to a person. She may not be acting from greed. She may be acting from something older than that." "What?" "Belief that the land should be productive. That sitting on something valuable when the town is struggling is a moral failure. Her father believed it for selfish reasons. She may believe it for what she thinks are good ones. Is that better or worse?" Nora asked. Della looked at her. "It's different. Whether it's better depends on whether she can be reached." "Can she?" Della turned her mug in her hands. "I don't know. I've known that woman since she was a girl. There's something in her that her father couldn't quite flatten. But whether it's enough?" She shook her head. "That I can't tell you." Nora reached into her coat and placed the locket on the table between them. Della looked at it. "She left this with you," Nora said. "Silas told me." Della reached out and touched it gently, then pushed it toward Nora. "She meant for you to have it." Nora opened it. One side held a photograph so small and worn she almost couldn't make out the face. But it was Hazel. Young, maybe 25, smiling in the way people smile when they don't know anyone is watching. The other side had words engraved in letters so small, Nora had to tilt the locket toward the lamplight to read them. This land remembers who loved it. Della's voice was quiet. She didn't leave you money. She couldn't. There wasn't much. She left you the thing she thought was worth more. Nora closed the locket. Memory and position, Della said. What you do with what she protected, that's yours now. Nora held the locket in her closed fist. She didn't leave you a house. Della continued. She left you a fight. The question she was always asking herself about you, from the time you were small, was whether you were the kind of person who would hold the line or find a reason to step back. What did she decide? Della looked at her. She left you the house. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. They stayed until the light outside had gone the color of cold brass, and Wren had read through 2 of Della's books and eaten a piece of cornbread Della produced from somewhere without ceremony. At the door, Della pulled Nora close briefly and said in a low voice, "Don't be polite with them. Polite people get run over in this county. It's geography." Nora almost laughed. Almost. The drive home was quiet. Trees moved past the windows. Lights appeared in distant houses. The road wound back up into the mountain, and the mountain accepted them with its customary indifference. Back at the house, Nora made dinner. Simple, what they had. Wren set the table without being asked. They ate without talking much. Afterwards, Wren went up to read, and Nora sat at the kitchen table with the documents and the locket and the envelope Silas had given her, and the folded meeting notice and the map from Silas's coat pocket. She arranged them. The 1901 geological survey from the South Hollow Chamber. The 1952 letters from Harold Dunning. The meeting notice from 3 weeks before Hazel died. The letters in Hazel's handwriting from the chest. The envelope addressed to the Land Conservation Office. She looked at the line they made. Not random, not accidental. A pattern. A century of the same fight returning in different forms with different faces and the same intention underneath. The land. Always the land. She opened the 3rd journal and turned to a page she had marked that morning. They think stubbornness is a flaw, Hazel had written. They think holding on is the same as being stuck. But there is a difference between a woman who cannot move and a woman who will not. I know which one I am. I've always known. The question I could never answer is whether the people who come after me will know the difference too. Nora set the journal down. She thought she understood what Hazel had been asking, and she thought she might know the answer. But before she could do anything with it, she needed to understand exactly what she was facing. Not just the history of it, the present shape of it. She needed to talk to Sheriff Clem Haskell, not to report anything, Not yet. But to find out what he knew, and more importantly, what he'd seen, because someone had been in this house before she arrived. Someone with clean boots and local knowledge and the confidence to enter a dead woman's property without worrying too much about consequences. And she wanted to know if the sheriff had an opinion about who that was. She put the journals away in the sewing table's false bottom. The one she'd found her second day here built into the underside of the old cabinet in the living room. She stacked the documents carefully on top, closed the latch, pulled the rug across the seam. Then she went upstairs. Wren was already asleep, book open on her chest, lamp still on. Nora turned off the lamp, stood in the dark for a moment listening to the house. It breathed the way old houses breathe, slow, settled, like something that had made its peace with time. She thought about what Della had said. She didn't leave you a house. She left you a position. She thought about what Silas had said. You hold your ground when you're scared. She thought about the meeting notice dated 3 weeks before Hazel died, about the careful bureaucratic patience of it, about the way some people plan around a dying woman like she's a variable in a spreadsheet. She stood in the dark of Wren's room, and she let herself feel something she'd been keeping at arm's length since she tore open the envelope at the bus station. Anger, real, clean, clear. Not panic, not grief. Anger, the kind that didn't cloud thinking, the kind that sharpened it. She would go see Clem Haskell in the morning, and she would ask him plainly what he knew and what he'd seen, and whether he intended to do anything about it. And then, depending on his answer, she would figure out what came next. She walked back to her own room, lay down on the iron bed, looked at the ceiling in the dark. Outside, the wind moved through the mountain trees the way it had been moving through them for longer than anyone had kept records. Long before the 1901 survey. Long before Harold Dunning wrote his first polite, threatening letter. Long before Hazel sat in this house alone and wrote in her journals for an audience she could only hope would come. The house held the sound of it, that long, slow wave of wind through bare branches. Not a warning, not a welcome, just the mountain doing what it did, staying. The sheriff's office smelled like coffee and old paper, and the particular quiet of a place where serious things got decided without ceremony. Sheriff Clem Haskell was at his desk when Nora walked in. 60s, a face that had seen things and decided to hold them calmly. He looked up and set his pen down and did not look surprised. "Figured I'd see you soon," he said. Nora sat across from him. "How much do you know?" He laced his fingers on the desk. "About the history of your family's land. Enough. About what's been happening the last few weeks, more than I'd like. Tell me." He was quiet for a moment, choosing. She could see him doing it, not deciding whether to be honest, deciding how much honesty served the situation.
There's been activity on the parcels adjacent to yours,
He said.
the ones that got sold off over the years to various holding companies. Most of those companies trace back, if you follow the paperwork far enough, to the same source. Dunning. He nodded. Not Harold anymore, but the family's interests have been managed through a series of entities since he died. The latest is connected to a consulting firm, goes by the name of a man called Grant Hollis. Nora kept her expression steady. He's already been to my door.
I know, Haskell said. I heard about it about 2 hours after it happened. This town. She nodded. He made an offer. I declined. He looked at her. He'll come back. I know. They don't need your land directly, he said. They need access through it, or around it, and they've been buying up everything on the perimeter for years. Small parcels, quiet transactions. Nothing individually significant enough to draw attention. Until the vote. Until the vote, he confirmed, which rezones the corridor, which makes their existing holdings suddenly worth considerably more, and which gives them legal grounds to petition for access rights across the ridge. Nora said, "They don't need to buy my land. They just need to make it impossible to use." He nodded. Property access disputes, utility easement claims. They have 3 different legal mechanisms they can deploy. None of them flashy. All of them designed to wear down someone without the resources to fight indefinitely. She looked at him. "Have you reported any of this?" "To who?" he said. Not bitterly, just plainly. The county council is the body that oversees land use decisions in this jurisdiction, and the council chair is Merritt Dunning. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Nora said, "Can you help me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I can tell you what I know. I can keep my eyes open. I can make sure that whatever happens, happens in the light." He paused. "But I can't fight a council vote. That's not in my jurisdiction. What happens at that meeting depends on what happens before it." She understood. She stood. He stood. "One more thing," she said. "The person who was in my house before I arrived, the coffee on the table, the boot prints." He met her eyes. "I'm going to say I don't know what you're talking about." She looked at him. "And you're going to believe me," he said. "Because whether or not it's literally true, the alternative explanation involves a conversation that doesn't benefit either of us right now." "Silas," she said, not a question. He said nothing, which was its own answer. Again. She walked out into the gray morning. Owen Danner was leaning against the hood of his truck outside, arms crossed, watching the street with the stillness of someone who had been waiting long enough not to look like he was waiting. He looked at her when she came out. "You talked to him." She zipped her coat. "He told me what I needed to know." Owen nodded. "The vote's in 3 weeks," he said.
There's a community meeting 2 days before. Town hall style. Anyone can speak. I know. You going to? She looked at him. Yes. He uncrossed his arms. There are others, he said. Besides me and Harriet. People who haven't sold. People who've been watching what's been bought up around them and doing the math and not liking what it adds up to. How many? Enough to make noise, he said. Maybe not enough to change the vote on their own, but enough that if someone is standing up front with a clear story and real documentation, it becomes harder for the council to ignore. She looked at him for a moment. The particular directness of a man who didn't spend words he didn't mean. I'll need a few days, she said. Take what you need, he said. But not more than 2 weeks. After that, the pressure on the fence sitters gets too strong. She nodded. He nodded. They went their separate ways. Back at the house, Wren was at the table with the laptop open and a look of deep concentration on her face. She looked up when Nora came in. I've been thinking. Nora took off her coat. Tell me, all the documents we have, the maps, the geological surveys, the letters, the journal pages, we have them. But they're paper, and paper can disappear. Nora went still. I know because someone already proved that. Wren continued. They broke in once. They could break in again. And if the documents are gone, we can't prove anything. Nora sat down. Wren turned the laptop toward her. I want to scan everything, she said. Every page. Upload it somewhere. Somewhere off this property. Nora looked at her daughter. When did you start thinking about this? Wren shrugged. When you were at the diner yesterday, I was here alone and I kept thinking, what if someone came while I was here? What would I do? And I realized the most important thing wasn't to protect me. It was to protect the information. Because if the information is safe, then we can always rebuild. But if it's gone, then we can't. 10 years old. Nora looked at her daughter for a long moment. We'll start tonight, she said. Every page. Wren nodded. Good. That night, they worked by lamplight. Wren fed pages through the scanner Nora had found in Hazel's bedroom closet, still in its box, never opened. A gift, maybe, from someone who had known what Hazel was preserving, or from Hazel herself in some moment of forward planning that had looked too far ahead to be acted on before time ran out. The scanner was slow. They worked in shifts, one scanning, one refolding and replacing. The fire crackled. The clock in the hallway ticked. At some point, past 9, Nora heard a car slow outside. She went to the window. A black SUV, no plate visible on the front. Tinted windows. Moving slowly past the property line. Not stopping. Just moving slowly enough that the message was clear. We know you're here. We're watching. We're patient. She stood at the window
until the car was gone. Then she stood there a little longer just to make sure. Wren had stopped scanning. She was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Them," she said.
Probably. Nora kept her voice level. "Are you scared?" Nora thought about the anger she'd felt last night. Clean and clear. "No," she said. And the strange thing was, it was true. They worked until midnight. By the time Wren fell asleep at the table, Nora had uploaded 4 folders to the cloud account Wren had set up. Everything labeled, everything backed up. 3 copies in 3 different locations, the way Hazel had stored her documents in 3 different hiding places. Because some lessons transcend generations. Because some women understand instinctively that the only defense against patient pressure is redundant preparation. Nora carried Wren upstairs, tucked her in, stood in the doorway a moment. She thought about Hazel's journal, the page about losing Nora's mother, about the land never walking away. She thought about all the ways people leave and all the ways things stay. She went back downstairs, sat at the table, opened the 4th journal to the last entry she hadn't read yet. It was dated 4 months before Hazel died. The handwriting was slower than in the earlier volumes, more deliberate, like each letter had been considered. Hazel had written, "If you're reading this, then you came back, or you came for the first time, which amounts to the same thing. I want you to know that what I protected here was never about the money underneath it. It was never about being right or being stubborn or winning anything. It was about the belief that some places are made by the people who love them. And that love, real love, the kind that shows up in the morning and does the work and stays when the staying is hard. That kind of love is worth protecting, even when it costs everything, especially when it costs everything. If you're reading this, then you understand that now. And if you understand it, you already know what to do." Nora read it twice, then she closed the journal. Outside, the wind moved through the ridge in that long, unhurried wave. She knew what to do. She had known since the bus station, if she was honest. Since she tore open the envelope and read her own name printed on paper that had been waiting for her. She just needed to be ready to do it. And now, sitting at this table in this house that had held its ground for a century, she was ready. She woke at 5 in the morning to the sound of the back door. Not wind, not the house settling. A door, deliberate, specific. She was on her feet before she was fully awake. Down the stairs in socked feet, into the kitchen. The back door was open, not broken, not forced. Open, like someone had a key, or like someone had left in a hurry and didn't bother pulling it shut. The sewing table. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled back the rug. The latch was still closed.
She opened it. The documents were still there, all of them, exactly as she had left them. She stood up, looked around the kitchen. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, except the table, the fourth journal, the one she had left closed on the table when she went to bed. It was open now, not to the last entry she had read, to an earlier page near the middle of the volume. Someone had been in here, had gone to the table, had opened the journal, had left, without taking anything, which was its own kind of message. We can come in whenever we want. We know what you have. We're not afraid of you. Nora stood in the kitchen with the cold morning air coming through the open back door, and she felt something that was not fear, and not quite anger, and not quite calm. Something underneath all three of those things. Something she recognized from the time she'd spent as a teacher, trying to reach a kid everyone else had given up on. The particular quality of attention that comes from understanding that what's at stake is real, and the window is closing, and there is no one else. Just you. Just this. She closed the back door. She checked the latch. She went upstairs and checked on Wren, still asleep, breathing slow and even, book still open on her chest from last night. Nora stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she went back downstairs and made coffee. And she sat at the kitchen table with the open journal, and she read the page someone had turned it to. Hazel had written, "They want you to feel alone. That's the strategy. Always has been. Make you feel like you're the only one standing. Make the standing feel foolish. Make the cost feel too high. But here is what they don't understand. What they have never understood about this family. We do not stand because we believe we will win. We stand because we cannot look at ourselves in the morning if we don't." Nora read it once, then again. Then she closed the journal and put it in the sewing table with everything else, and latched it and pulled the rug back and went to wake up her daughter. They had work to do. Owen Danner called at 7. His voice was tight, controlled in the way a voice gets when something has gone wrong and the person has already processed the panic and moved past it into function. "They took equipment in last night," he said, through the south access on the Tillis parcel. 2 trucks, a survey rig. They're on the land adjacent to your western boundary. Nora gripped the phone. "That's legal." "For now," he said. "But they're not surveying the Tillis parcel. They're surveying the ridge. Your ridge, from the outside in." She closed her eyes for half a second. "How far are they from a legal crossing point?" he said. "Maybe 40 feet. How long until they reach it? Depends how aggressive they get. Days, maybe less." She said, "I need 2 things. I need you to document everything. Photographs, timestamps, every piece of equipment you can identify." "Done." "What's the second?" "I need everyone who said they'd stand with us. Ready, not in 3 weeks, in 10 days. Silence on the line. Then, "That's fast." I know. Another silence, shorter.
I'll make some calls, he said, and hung up.
Nora set the phone down. Wren was at the table watching her.
How bad?
Wren asked.
Bad enough that we move now instead of waiting.
Wren nodded.
Okay, what do I do?
Nora looked at her daughter, at the steadiness in that small face, at the particular quality of calm that Wren had always had, even in the bus station, even in the cold, even in every shelter and church basement and community center that had been a temporary wall between them and nowhere. She had never once fallen apart. This child, not once. Nora had always thought it was because Wren trusted her. And maybe it was. But sitting here in this kitchen, in this mountain house, Nora thought maybe it was something else too. Maybe Wren had simply decided early that falling apart was a luxury they couldn't afford, and she had arranged herself accordingly, the way Hazel had, the way Nora was only now learning to. Keep scanning, Nora said. Everything we haven't gotten to yet, every single page. Wren turned to the scanner without another word. Nora put on her coat and went outside. The morning was white and still. Frost on the grass. The ridge visible above the tree line. Silent, ancient, completely unbothered by everything happening at its base. She walked to the edge of the property and looked west.
She couldn't see the equipment from here, but she knew it was there. She could feel the particular pressure of it, the way you can feel a storm before it arrives. Not in the air exactly, in the quality of the quiet. She stood there for a while. Then she went back inside and sat down and wrote. Not the statement she had been drafting for the council meeting. Something different, longer, slower. The full story, starting with Hazel's great-great-grandfather drawing maps by compass in the 1870s, moving through the generations. The 1901 survey, the 1952 letters from Harold Dunning, Hazel's decades of quiet resistance, the journals, the hidden chambers, the spring house, the stone door that swung on a hinge that should have rusted shut, but hadn't because someone had built it right. She wrote about the meeting notice dated 3 weeks before her grandmother died. She wrote about the black SUV. She wrote about the back door open at 5 a.m. with the journal turned to a different page. She wrote it plainly. No accusations she couldn't support. No claims she couldn't document. Just the facts in the order they had happened. The shape of a century-long story about a piece of land and the people who had wanted it and the woman who had refused. And the granddaughter who came back. She sent it to 4 places. A regional paper out of Lexington. An environmental news outlet she found through one of the conservation organization websites she'd been researching. A community land trust with a regional office 3 counties over. And a woman named Patrice Hollowell, who ran a blog about Appalachian land rights that had 15,000 subscribers and a reputation for not being intimidated. She sent it at 9:47 in the morning. By noon, her email had responses. By 2 in the afternoon, Patrice Hollowell had called her directly. "I've been watching this county for 3 years," Patrice said. "This is the 4th time a property with subsurface mineral potential has gone through the same sequence. Perimeter acquisition, rezoning proposal, council vote." She paused. The other 3 times, there was no one left to object. "This time there is," Nora said. "I know. That's why I called." They talked for 40 minutes. By the end of it, Patrice had offered to publish a feature piece. Full documentation. Named sources where permitted. Anonymous where necessary. Time to run 4 days before the council vote. The story would be out before the council could contain it. Nora hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Then she heard Wren from the living room. "Mom." She went in. Wren was at the window, looking out at the road. There was a car parked at the edge of the property line. Not the black SUV, a different car, older, a dark blue sedan with local plates, and leaning against the driver's side door with her arms crossed and her coat collar turned up against the wind. Marette Dunning. Nora looked at her for a moment through the glass. Marette wasn't moving, wasn't coming to the door, just standing there, like she was deciding something, or had decided something and was waiting for the courage to act on it. Nora put on her coat. "Don't," Wren said quietly. "She's not here to threaten me," Nora said. She would have sent someone else for that. She went outside. The cold hit immediately. She walked down the porch steps and across the frost-stiff grass to the property line, stopped about 10 feet from where Marette was standing. They looked at each other. Marette Dunning was not what Nora had expected. Somehow, she had built a version of this woman in her mind, assembled from Harold Dunning's threatening letters and the signature on the meeting notice. Something harder. Something with less uncertainty in it. But the woman standing here had uncertainty written all over her. Not weakness, just complexity. The kind of face that has spent a long time looking at something uncomfortable. "You came to my house," Nora said. "I know," without calling. "I was afraid I'd lose my nerve if I waited." Nora said nothing. Marette looked at the house behind her, then at the ridge beyond it, then back at Nora. "My father talked about this land my entire childhood," she said, like it was something that had been taken from him, like the Calloway family had something that rightfully belonged to us. He believed that completely, and I grew up inside that belief. Nora waited. "I signed the scheduling form for the meeting because I believed what I'd been told, that the land was sitting idle, that the community needed the economic activity, that your grandmother had been holding the county back out of stubbornness." She paused. "I read your article this morning. It went up 3 hours ago." "I know," she said. "I have a Google alert on the property address." She said it without embarrassment, just plain. like someone stating a fact about themselves they've made peace with. Nora looked at her. I read it. Marais continued. And then I called my father's oldest friend, man named Pershing. He's 91. Has no reason to lie to me. She stopped. He told me things about 1952 that my father never mentioned. About what was actually in those letters. About what was forged. About what was threatened. Nora felt something tighten in her chest. Marais's voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that costs something. My father lied to me, she said. Not just by what he said, by what he left out, by the story he chose to tell about this land and your family. He made himself the injured party. He was not the injured party. Silence. Wind through the bare trees. What do you want? Nora asked. Marais looked at her. I want to know if it's too late to be something other than what my father made me into. Nora looked at this woman, at the 54-year-old daughter of Harold Dunning, standing at the edge of a property her family had spent 70 years trying to take. Looking like someone who had just realized the story she'd been living in was not the story she thought it was. Nora knew something about that. It's not too late, she said. Marais exhaled, short, quick, like she'd been holding it. The vote, she said. I know. I can't promise you the whole council, Marais said, but I can promise you my vote, and I can promise you I'll make the case to the 2 members who are genuinely undecided. The others are committed to Hollis, and I won't lie to you about that. What about the survey equipment on the Tillis parcel? Marais's jaw tightened. That's not council jurisdiction. That's a private land action. I can't stop it directly. But there are environmental review requirements for survey activity within 200 feet of a designated watershed boundary, she said carefully. And the spring on your property, is it flowing year-round? Yes. Then it may qualify as a protected water source under the County Environmental Code, which would trigger a mandatory review period. Which would? She paused. Create a legal basis for halting the survey activity pending assessment. Nora looked at her. How long would the review take? Minimum 60 days, Marais said. More likely 90. That's enough time. That's the idea. They stood in the cold for a moment. Not warmly, not as friends, but as 2 women who had just made a decision to stop being on opposite sides of something. I'll need documentation of the spring, Marais said. Flow rate, temperature, location relative to the watershed boundary. I have maps, Nora said. And Hazel kept temperature records for 30 years. Of course she did, Marais said. And for the first time, something moved across her face that was almost rueful, almost fond. Your grandmother was the most relentlessly prepared person I have ever not wanted to deal with. Nora almost smiled. Almost. I'll get you what you need by tomorrow morning, she said. Marais nodded. She turned to go, then stopped. I'm sorry, she said.
She didn't turn back around, just set it to the road in front of her. For my part in this, for the meeting notice, for not asking the right questions sooner. Nora looked at the back of her head, at the coat collar turned up against the cold, at the rigid set of a woman's shoulders when she is doing something that costs her. "Thank you for coming," Nora said. Marek got in her car and drove away. Nora stood at the property line for a long moment after the car disappeared around the bend. Then she went inside. Wren was standing in the front room. She had clearly watched the whole thing through the window. What did she want? Wren asked. "To change sides," Nora said. Wren absorbed this. "Can people do that sometimes?" Nora said, "when they finally hear the right story." 3 days before the council meeting, the article ran. Not just Patrice's piece, 2 others. The regional paper out of Lexington ran a shorter version focused on the survey equipment and the watershed question. An environmental law organization in Charleston reached out about filing a formal objection to the rezoning proposal on procedural grounds. Their lawyer said they'd seen this pattern before. The perimeter acquisition, the quiet rezoning, the access petition. She called it textbook. Nora's phone didn't stop. Some calls were supportive. Local people she'd never met. People in neighboring counties who had watched similar things happen to their own communities. A woman in her 70s who had lost her family's farm to a similar process 15 years ago and called just to say, "I'm glad someone is fighting this time." Some calls were not supportive. One was a lawyer representing Grant Hollis's firm. Polite, professional, flagging what he called potential inaccuracies in the published accounts, suggesting that any further statements be reviewed carefully. Nora listened to the whole message. Then she deleted it. One call she almost didn't answer because the number was unfamiliar. But she answered it. "Ms. Calloway." The voice was a woman's, professional, calm. "I'm with the Appalachian Regional Land Trust. We received a referral from Patrice Hollowell, and we've been reviewing your property documentation for the past 48 hours. Nora sat down. The woman's name was Carol Fenwick. She had been working in land conservation for 30 years, and she spoke about the Calloway property with a precision that told Nora she had done her homework. She mentioned the 1901 survey, the geological assessments, the watershed designations, the legal structure of the existing deed. And then she mentioned a protective easement, a permanent one. "Under this structure," Carol said, "you retain full ownership of the property. You can live on it, farm it, pass it to your heirs. But any future sale or development use would require approval from the trust and must meet strict environmental protection criteria. No mining, no industrial access, no subsurface extraction." Nora's hand tightened on the phone. "Permanently." "Permanently," Carol confirmed. "It cannot be undone by a county council vote. It cannot be overridden by a rezoning decision.
It operates at a different legal level entirely. How long would it take? For a property with existing documentation as thorough as yours, she said. We could have the paperwork ready within 2 weeks of your agreement. Nora closed her eyes for 1 second. One clean second of something she couldn't name. Not relief exactly, not triumph, something quieter than both. Yes, she said. Pardon? Yes, I agree. Let's do it. A pause on the line. Then I'll send the preliminary documents tomorrow. The night before the council meeting, Nora couldn't sleep. She didn't try very hard. She sat on the porch in Hazel's old coat, the one she'd found on the hook by the back door the second day. Heavy wool, patched at one elbow, smelling of cedar and old work. She had started wearing it without thinking about it, and then with thinking about it. And now she wore it every day because it fit in the way that things fit when they were meant for you, even if they were meant for someone else first. The stars were out, sharp, cold, the kind of night sky you only get in places where no one has thought to light up the dark yet. She thought about Hazel, about a woman who had sat on this same porch, looking at these same stars, carrying this same weight for decades, alone. I don't know if she'll come back. Hazel had written, I left the door unlocked. Some people need to know a door is unlocked before they can choose to walk through it. Nora had needed that. She hadn't known she needed it, but she had. She thought about her mother, about the car door slamming, about the rear window and the figure getting smaller, about the years she had spent being certain that leaving was the right thing to do, because her mother was certain, and certainty is contagious. About the entry in the journal. Maybe she was right. Maybe I do love this land more than her. But this land never walked away from me. Both of them had been right. Both of them had been wrong. Both of them had loved in ways that cost the other person something real. And neither of them had known how to say that while there was still time. Nora pressed her hand flat against the porch railing. The wood was cold under her palm, solid, staying. She thought, I don't want Wren to ever have to find a letter under a floorboard to know that I loved her. She thought, I don't want to communicate through hiding places and journals and messages tucked inside the walls. She thought, some things should just be said. She stayed on the porch until the cold became persuasive, and then she went inside and she stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment. Then she went up and she pushed open Wren's door. Wren was asleep. Lamp off this time. The survey map she'd been studying was folded neatly on the nightstand. Nora sat on the edge of the bed. Wren stirred. Mom, I need to tell you something. Wren pushed herself up on one elbow. Okay. Nora looked at her daughter in the dark. I've been scared for a long time, she said. Not this week, longer than this week. For most of your life I've been scared,
and I've been trying to carry it by myself because I didn't want you to feel it. Wren didn't say anything, but you felt it anyway, didn't you? Wren was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
You don't have to be sorry, Wren said. I understood. I know you did, Nora said. That's sort of what I'm apologizing for, that you had to. Wren sat up fully. She pulled the quilt around her shoulders. Is this about tomorrow? It's about everything, Nora said, but also tomorrow. Are you scared about tomorrow? Nora thought about it. Honestly, no, she said. Not anymore. Wren looked at her in the particular way she had. That still, seeing look. Good, Wren said, because I'll be right there. I know, and I already uploaded everything to 3 different drives. I know that too, and if anyone tries anything, I'm going to be very loud. Nora almost laughed. Yes, I know. Wren lay back down. Okay, she said. Get some sleep. Nora smoothed the edge of the quilt, the way she had when Wren was much smaller, the way that doesn't go away just because the child gets bigger. She went to her own room and slept. The county hall parking lot was full an hour before the meeting started. Nora saw it from the road and felt something shift in her chest. Cars she recognized. Owen Danner's truck, Harriet Mobley's old wagon with the cracked taillight, Silas's dark green pickup, and cars she didn't recognize. People from neighboring properties, people from the next county, people she had never met who had read the article and driven here because they understood what was at stake, even without a personal stake in it. She parked and sat for a moment. Wren was in the passenger seat with her notebook open and her pen behind her ear. Ready, Wren said. Yeah. They went in. The room was standing capacity. The smell of damp coats and nervous energy and bad coffee. The council sat at the long oak table up front. 7 members, 5 men, 2 women. Marette Dunning in the center seat, her face composed, unreadable to anyone who didn't know what it had cost her to get here. Grant Hollis was in the back row, dark suit, no expression, the kind of stillness that comes from professional practice. Nora signed her name to the speaker list, took a seat near the front. Wren sat beside her. Silas appeared from the side aisle and sat behind them, said nothing, just put his hand briefly on the back of Nora's chair. Not her shoulder, the chair, like he was anchoring something. Della Vance materialized in the seat beside Wren. No coat, like she'd been there all along. You look like your grandmother right now, Della said quietly. I mean that as the highest possible compliment. The meeting moved through its business. Road maintenance, school budget, a noise ordinance update that someone had strong feelings about. The room endured all of it with the particular compressed attention of people waiting for the thing that actually mattered.
Then Marette Dunning said, Item 7. Review and consideration of the Northern Ridge Development Overlay. The room changed. Nora stood when her name was called. She walked to the podium. She didn't have notes. She looked at the council, then at the room. My grandmother lived in Harlan County for 82 years, she said. She raised crops on land her family had worked since 1882. She kept records of every flood, every drought. Every season the creek ran a different color. She kept records of every offer she was made to sell and every reason she refused. She kept journals in a box under the floorboards and survey maps in a chamber cut into the side of a mountain because she understood that what she was protecting was worth protecting carefully. The room was very quiet. She didn't protect it because it was valuable, Nora said. She protected it because it was true. Because the land under that ridge tells a story about this county that goes back further than any of us. And some stories should not be erased just because erasing them is profitable. She looked at the council directly. 3 weeks before my grandmother died, someone in this room scheduled a vote, not after she was gone, while she was dying. Like the timing of her death was a project management consideration. Murmuring in the room. Low. Controlled. I'm not here to accuse anyone of anything, Nora said. I'm here to tell you what this land is. It's not empty. It's not idle. It's not sitting there waiting to be productive. It has been productive for over 100 years in ways that don't show up in a tax bracket. It has been a watershed, a habitat, a home, a record, a kept promise from one generation to the next. She paused. My grandmother kept that promise alone for 60 years. I don't intend to let it end with her. She stepped back from the podium. Wren stood up. The room shifted, not in volume, in quality. The particular shift of a room when something unexpected happens and everyone decides simultaneously to pay attention. Wren walked to the podium. She was small behind it. Her voice came out clear anyway. I'm 10, she said. I know that doesn't mean much to most people in this room, but I've spent the last 2 weeks reading my great-grandmother's journals. Every page. And I want to say one thing. She looked at the council. She built something that lasted, she said. Not because she had money or power or lawyers, because she paid attention, because she showed up every day, because she understood that some things only survive if someone decides they're worth surviving. She looked out at the room. Once you break something open, you can't put it back the way it was. She walked back to her seat. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the room started to breathe again. The council deliberated behind the partition for 22 minutes. Nora counted. She sat with her hands in her lap and Wren beside her, and Della Vance on the other side, and Silas behind her, like a wall made of old loyalty. And she waited. When they came back, Councilman Paris stood instead of Marais. His voice was careful. In light of the documentation presented, and the public interest expressed. He said, and pending review of the environmental protection filings submitted this week regarding the watershed designation. The Council votes to table the Northern Ridge Development Overlay pending a full environmental and historical review. Estimated timeline: 90 days. The room released. Not in cheering, in exhaling, the sound of a lot of people letting go of something they'd been holding. Nora sat still. She felt Wren's hand find hers under the table and hold it. She let herself feel it, all of it, the relief and the exhaustion and the particular specific grief of wishing Hazel had been here to see it, and the particular specific warmth of knowing that Hazel had made it possible. After the meeting, the room emptied slowly. People stopped to shake her hand. Owen Danner, Harriet Mobley, who said nothing but held Nora's hand in both of hers for a moment, in a way that said everything. People she didn't know who pressed her arm and nodded and moved on. Silas stopped beside her. She would have been insufferable about this, he said. Nora looked at him in the best possible way. Absolutely, he said. Unbearable. He almost smiled. Good work. He walked out. Nora was near the door when Marette Dunning stopped her. They were alone in the hallway. The sound of the parking lot coming through the walls. Engines starting, voices fading. Marette stood straight, hands at her sides. The look of someone who has done the harder thing and is standing in the aftermath of it. It passed. She said, I know. The easement paperwork, Marette said. From the Land Trust. Send me a copy when it's done. I'll make sure the county records are updated properly. Thank you, Marette nodded. She looked at the wall for a moment, then at Nora. My father spent 30 years trying to take what wasn't his, she said. I spent 20 years not asking whether he was right because asking felt like disloyalty. Nora looked at her. I know something about that, she said quietly. Marette met her eyes. I thought you might. They didn't say anything else, but they stood there for a moment in the hallway of the county building with everything that had been between their families for 70 years resting quietly in the space between them. Not resolved, not healed, but named. And naming a thing is where everything starts. Marette Dunning walked out first. Nora stood in the empty hallway for a moment. Then she went to find her daughter. 2 weeks later, the easement was signed. Carol Fenwick from the Land Trust drove down from Charleston with 2 colleagues and a notary, and they sat at Hazel's kitchen table and went through every page carefully. Della Vance was there. Silas was there. Owen Danner stood in the doorway because the kitchen couldn't hold everyone. When it was done, Carol sat back and said, That's it. It's permanent. The words were plain, simple, the way the most important things often are.
Wren looked at Nora. Is it safe now?
Nora looked at her daughter, at the kitchen table covered in documents that had started their life hidden inside stone and under floorboards and folded into the walls of this house, at the fire in the stove, at the window with the ridgeline visible beyond it. Safe, she said, and seen. After everyone left, they walked the ridge, just the two of them. The trail was muddy from 2 days of rain, but neither of them minded. They went past the spring house, past the hollow, up to the overlook where the whole valley spread below them like something that had been waiting for exactly this angle. Wren stood at the edge and looked out. The hawk appeared from somewhere to the left and traced a wide circle above the tree line without effort. Patient, unhurried, like it had all the time in the world and knew it. Wren watched it. Are we staying? She asked. Nora thought about Carol Fenwick's question when they'd spoken on the phone, about what she planned for the property long term, about the university position someone had mentioned, about all the things that waited elsewhere, about the pull of elsewhere that had always lived in her like a low-frequency hum. She looked at the ridge, at the valley, at the hawk still circling. Not forever, she said. Wren turned to look at her. But long enough, Nora said, to learn what she knew, to record what she recorded, to make sure someone after us knows where the spring is and why it matters. Wren turned back to the valley, and then we pass it on. Yes, Nora said, and then we pass it on. They stood there until the cold became insistent. Then they started back down. Wren went ahead on the trail, picking her way through the mud with the confidence of someone who had learned this path and intended to keep knowing it. Nora followed, and behind them, the ridge held its ground. The way it had for longer than anyone had been counting, unhurried, enormous, made patient by time in a way that nothing built quickly ever is. At the house, Nora went to the kitchen table. She sat down. She pulled a sheet of paper toward her. She wrote slowly. Not to the land trust, not to a lawyer, not to a newspaper, to the person who would come after. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know when they would come. She only knew that someone would, because that was how this place worked. It waited. It kept. It remembered. And when the right person came, it gave them everything they needed to understand. She wrote, "If you're reading this, then you found your way here. That's enough. That already tells me something important about you. What's here isn't money. It isn't power. It isn't anything that makes the ordinary kind of sense. What's here is a record, a kept thing, a place that survived because the people who loved it understood that love isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make every morning, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She left it for you. I'm leaving it for you now. Take care of it, and when the time comes, leave it for the next one." She folded the letter, placed it in the wooden box alongside Wren's drawing of the spring house, alongside the locket with its engraved words, alongside a small pressed flower from the south hollow that Wren had put in without explaining. She closed the box, set it on the shelf beside the journals, where it could wait, the way things in this house had always waited, with patience, with faith, with the particular stubborn certainty that the right person would come. They always had. They always would. Outside, the mountain stood against the evening sky, the way it had stood against every sky before this one, gray and enormous and rooted in something so deep no survey had ever fully mapped it. The last light caught the ridgeline and held it for a moment. Gold against the dark, still, staying. And then the dark came, and the house held its warmth against it, the way it always had.